Good morning and welcome to the BIM for Infrastructure webinar series. My name is George Lukes from the Utah DOT, and today we're going to be talking about model development standards, models of legal document, national updates, and things of that nature. A couple of things we're going to go through really quick first. Randy, if you'll go to the next slide. We want to talk a little bit about the housekeeping. We're going to record this, and so it'll be available in the future if you don't get to see the whole thing or you have someone that's interested. This is kind of a different platform that we're in, so if you show as anonymous, don't worry about it. That's just how Team Live logs you in. If you want to type a message in the Q&A, you can either type your name in or just stay as anonymous. We'll get it either way. If you're having issues with your audio, if you're not hearing us, which I guess this doesn't help if I'm saying it, but you probably have us muted or your volume's at 0. So you need to change the settings on your computer's sound. Next slide. So this is a little bit of what it should look like on your screen. Up in the top right, there's a little icon for questions on the chat. You click that to activate the live event Q&A, and then you can go in and type in your question. If you look at the bottom, there's a little scroll bar. If you leave for a second, you can either go back or skip to the live spot or whatever you need to do. And then, like I said, just put your questions in and we will get to them as we can. Next slide. So before we get into our HEAP intro, there's a couple things I wanted to go over. First of all, these webinars don't put themselves together. It takes a lot of work to get to where we are, and I just wanted to make a special thanks to Will Sharp, Sandra Larson, Ahmad Abul Awash, Lance Parvey, John Wilkerson, Lexa Mitchell, Ben Jilk, Randy Robinson, and Ian Howe. It's taken a lot of time to get to this point, and it's quite a bit of work. Our sponsors today are HEAP, the Highway Engineering Exchange Program, Building Smart USA, and TRB AED 80 per N1. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Elaine Richard, and she's going to talk a little bit about HEAP and our conference coming up. Elaine?
Oh, hello, everybody. This is Elaine Richard. I'm president of HEAP for 2021. We are announcing today that our annual conference is just 2 months away. It's going to be November 30th to December 2nd. We have over 80 breakout sessions scheduled and over 100 speakers. We have 7 roundtables. Our guest speakers will be the DOT Commissioner and our Engineering Construction Bureau Chief, so we're really excited about that. We will be having a BIM panel during the general session, and our focus areas, are there'll be many sessions on BIM for infrastructure, field technology, data management, asset management, GIS, data governance, document management, and project design. We'll be talking a lot about LOD and what we're putting in the models and how we're sharing the models. So we have a full slate of sessions planned, and we're really excited. So again, this is going to be in Hartford, Connecticut. It's going to be full in person with no virtual option. And if you're interested, please visit our website, heap.org. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm just going to put in another plug for HEAP. It's a great conference. It is a bunch of people from industry that are forward thinking, and we'll be talking about a lot of different things, but it's a great conference to go to. Randy, next slide. So this is a set of webinar series or webinars in a series that we're kind of going in a progression, kind of starting with 3D models and hoping to end with digital twins. It's really the industry and the opportunities and challenges that may have been realized by different DOTs or contractors or industry. And so with that, we're looking at the life cycle of this entire move from a paper set to a data set. And as everyone probably on here knows, it's extremely challenging. So today we're going to talk a lot about model development standards. Model is the legal document. And we're going to talk basically from a national perspective and getting down to a panel discussion. Next slide, Randy. So today we're going to start with an introductory session. It's going to be the national perspective with Mike Kennerly from JTC-EES and Roger Grant from NIBS, the National Institute of Building Sciences. Then we're going to move and have three of our DOTs talk a little bit about the things that they're doing, some of their challenges, some of their successes, and I shouldn't say DOTs, agencies, and looking at what they're doing to get to the models, the legal document. And we'll wrap that up with a panel discussion with some national perspective, agency perspective, contractor perspective, and an expert perspective, talking a lot about models of legal document and model development standards and what that would look like. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Kennerly. He is the chair of the Joint Technical Committee for Electronic Engineering Standards with the AASHTO Committee on Design, and he's also with the Iowa DIT. Mike?
Thank you, George. We can go to the next slide. The Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards is one of the technical committees under the Committee on Design. And, you know, we have a rather broad committee. And as you can see there, you know, it's made up of several state DOTs. We actually have representation from each of the 4 AASHTO regions, which I think is really important. But then we also have a mixture of not just design, but we also have on our committee representatives from the bridges and structures world, construction, maintenance, you know, and as you can see, we've got some consultants involved as well as some vendors in terms of Autodesk, Bentley, and Trimble. And that really gives us a nice broad perspective from which to work and try to put some of these things together. You can go to the next slide. You know, one of the things that we thought was really important as a committee was that whole issue of interoperability. You know, that ability for us to be able to transfer data seamlessly across the life cycle, you know, as you move from planning to design to construction and then eventually to asset management. You know, now the reality is that with the tools we have today, they don't always communicate nicely. And as a result, sometimes there's rework, there's data loss, there's frustration, you know, and there's just an inherent inefficiency with some of the tools that we have today because they do not communicate seamlessly. And so one of the things that as a committee we felt was important was to try to adopt a single standard from which we could use in terms of communicating throughout that life cycle. And so in October of 2019, you know, we proposed to the AASHTO leadership that we adopt IFC as a standard for state transportation agencies, and that resolution was adopted. Could you go back one slide, please? That resolution was adopted, you know, and you know, one of the things that we included in there was the recommendation to create a cross-discipline committee that would lead and guide this umbrella effort to move to IFC. And then we also proposed the investigation of AASHTO joining IFC. You know, and so, you know, we're hoping to get those things moving, and I'll share a little bit more about that later. Next slide. Now, as we started to look at our work plan for the technical committee, you know, we looked at, you know, some areas that we felt were important to provide information on as agencies make that transition from that traditional 2D workflow, you know, to a digital workflow. You know, and as we thought about that, there were, you know, the things that we identified that we thought would be great to provide guidance on were level of development, model as a legal document, and then a webinar series that actually came out of a survey that was done, and one of the things that was highlighted in there was the need for more information. And so we, like this, created a webinar series, but then also asset management and then a BIM maturity model. Next slide. In terms of level of development, and this is an area that's being led up by John Wilkerson of Michigan DOT, who's a member of our committee. And this is something that's been really important in terms of making that transition and understanding all of the issues that are associated with transferring information, identifying the level of effort that's required and the level of detail that's required as you move through the various phases of project development. And this group had been very active. They've done a lot of good work, and, one of the things that we're looking forward to in the very near future is some output from them that we can then put on our website and then provide to states to use, in terms of their own effort to move through that 2D to a digital workflow transformation. Next slide. The other thing that we've been looking at, and George talked about, in the introduction, was the issues associated with making the model the legal document. And anybody who's tried to look at this effort realizes there are a number of issues that you have to address, and you have to figure out how you're going to manage that, because it opens up a whole new world for us in terms of how we interact with the contractor, how we interact with the contract administration staff, how we interact with some of the agencies that we work with during project development. And so when you start looking at model as a legal document, there are a number of issues that need to be identified and need to be addressed. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is help outline what those are, and then give states maybe some hints or tips, in terms of how they might do it based on some of the experiences some of the lead states like Utah, Michigan, and others have had in terms of making this transition. And as part of that, one of the things that we're looking at is trying to develop a maturity model that gives you guidance in terms of where you are and then how to make that next step to the next level. Next slide. And I mentioned earlier the webinar series, and this was something that, we discovered as a result of a survey that was done by the AASHTO Construction Committee. And they had a lot of feedback on electronic models and the issues associated with them from their perspective, and one of them, was really about just trying to understand all of this. How does all of this fit together? What's the language that we're now speaking? What does it all mean? How does it relate? And so we, like this, have developed a webinar series to kind of walk you through all of that, and help you prepare to make that transition, to a digital workflow. And then there's, we've highlighted some things during that in terms of, some of the topics we've talked about, the BIM global benchmarking scan that FHWA sponsored. Also, Roger Grant will talk a little bit more about that U.S. National BIM Program Steering Committee. But those are topics that we've introduced during that webinar series to kind of broaden, everybody's knowledge of what's going on nationally, to kind of help them, get to get a sense of what we're doing and where this is going. Because, one of the things that you find out very quickly as you start to, stick your toe in this water is there is a lot going on. There is a ton of information already out there. There are a ton of initiatives going on, and trying to help people get their arms around that has been one of our focuses. Next slide. Bill Pratt from Connecticut DOT has been looking at the asset management perspective of all of this. Because at the end of the day, what you want to be able to do is create a digital as-built that then can be harvested, in terms of taking that information out of the as-built and then putting it into your asset management warehouse, and or various warehouses that you use to manage your assets throughout their life cycle. I think we all know that there's a ton of information that's gathered during construction that either isn't always captured or isn't captured in a way that makes it accessible across the enterprise. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, how do you do that? How do you capture that information? Number one, what information do you need to capture, to what level of detail and accuracy? And then how do you spread that, throughout your agency, it's so that you can manage those assets better. Next slide. In terms of our next steps, the thing that we're looking at is the getting that cross-discipline committee that was identified in the IFC resolution off the ground. And Mike Buseman from Montana DOT will be chairing that committee. And we're hoping that that one gets up and going fairly quickly. And then we're going to be providing another update at our annual meeting coming up in November. The next thing I want to touch on briefly is the AASHTO BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund. Now, this has been, you can go to the next, this has been something that was actually initiated by Connie Yu, formerly of the FHWA. She's now retired, but this was one of her initiatives in terms of trying to take a holistic look at BIM. We do have a BIM for Bridges Pooled Fund, but this one looks at the entire process. Iowa is the lead state. You can see that we've got participation so far from several states: Arizona, Florida, Indiana. You can see the list there. We're still interested in getting additional states to join in and jump on the bandwagon. And when you take a look at the preliminary scope, we want to develop BIM use cases, establish BIM processes. Look at the skills associated with moving to BIM, because it does require a slightly different skill set, and then deploy data management tools and techniques, as well as that whole issue of information exchange. Next slide. Our current status is, we are up and running. Our kickoff meeting will be October 27th. Our early priority is going to be trying to refine that scope, develop a consultant RFP, and then one of the things that we think is really important is to coordinate efforts with that other pooled fund that was established for bridges and structures. In terms of, if you're interested, or if this is something that you think your state would like to participate in, you can contact Kyle Kloop from the Iowa DOT. His contact information is there at the bottom. And then you can also contact either myself or Catherine Petros from the FHWA. So with that, I'll turn it over to Roger Grant.
Thank you, Mike. That was very interesting. And hello, everyone. I'm Roger Grant with the National Institute of Building Sciences. I'm the Executive Director of Building Information Management there. The National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS, is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization established by the Congress in 1974 to support advances in building science and technology to improve the built environment. Our role is to interface between government and the private sector to help identify and resolve problems that might hamper the construction of safe, secure, affordable, high-performance facilities and infrastructure. And we're a resource to work with the design, construction, owner community to accomplish that. We have a long history of working on digital practice standardization here in the U.S. We started the CAD Council in 1994. We started the Building Smart Alliance in 2005, which grew out of the International Alliance for Interoperability and has since become Building Smart International. And then we transitioned that to the NIBS BIM Council in 2020, and we have been publishing the National BIM Standard US since 2007. And in 2021, we formed the National BIM program and established a steering committee, because while we felt we had been making some progress, there was still a lot that needed to be done. And so we wanted to try and find a way to accelerate those efforts, because frankly, Mike said that there's a lot to do. We have a lot of challenges. We have great organizations and great technology in our industry, but we still stumble along with some challenges like endemic low productivity growth in the building industry. We have lots of unfunded needs for civil infrastructure, schools, power generation, climate change, resilience, energy efficiency, carbon reduction, housing. And we actually see the government interested in taking some action on this with the Build Back Better program. So we want to be in a position to help support that. We have workforce capacity and diversity issues in our industry. Our practitioners, frankly, struggle with low profitability. They can't fund these kinds of efforts to remake the industry out of the profits they make. Our facility owners have an information deficit. Just actually last week, Autodesk and FMI released a study called Harnessing the Data Advantage in Construction that estimates that bad data, data that's inaccurate, incomplete, inaccessible, inconsistent, or untimely, and can't be used to derive actionable insights, might have cost the global construction industry $1.85 trillion in 2020 alone. So this is the result of diverse requirements that aren't consistent, varied levels of adoption across delivery and management, needs for education and training in our industry, challenges with interoperability, like Mike talked about, working with exchanging information using IFC. We've tried to address this, as I mentioned, with our national BIM standard, but this has been done largely through volunteer efforts, which, while effective and bring the knowledge of the practitioner, struggle to make enough progress. And there are a lot of other standards out there, international standards, that we could be taking advantage of. So we have these challenges. We want to try and address them. We formed the National BIM program with this vision and mission to do that. And the way we're going about it, next slide, is to, by setting some goals to work in broad areas to put together a program that, yes, we need a next generation of standards that really addresses both information change, but also practice and what are the practices that we need or should follow more consistently to implement information exchange effectively, and to leverage the technology that we have, foster innovation in our industry to remake the way we do things, better integration of design and manufacturing, helping owners to address the information deficit that they have and give them clearer and more concise ways to do, we're going to talk about later here, use the model as a quote contract document. That's always been curious to me why we have to refer to it as a document, but we need to remake the way we contract or improve the way we contract and make it easier for owners to be able to do that. And that takes education and training. It takes communities that can come together to address these issues. It's a bit of a transformational challenge that we face to address some of the challenges and take advantage of them, because these challenges are also really opportunities for us to improve the way we work and the way we work together in our industry. So next slide. To do that, we've set up some work streams to align with the goals to help us create this plan, to look at owners, both public and private. We need to bring a coalition of public and private owners together to accomplish this here in our country. We want to look at how we implement on projects, because owners need to have projects implemented effectively, and who all needs to be engaged, from the workforce through to the owners suite. You know, this topic of digital twins is interesting to me. The chair of our steering committee, Sal Eckhart from Microsoft, is in their real estate division, and she said as they've started to think of digital twins, they've really moved from thinking about their physical assets as just something on the balance sheet to really tools that they can use to help accomplish their mission. That's a big change in thinking. We need the standards and guidelines to do this. We have a work stream around that, and then also to help identify education and training and the contracting aspects. Next slide, please. We've been working with advisors from other countries that have taken this problem on. This in the center of this chart is the strategic framework that the European Union BIM Task Group established to help member countries set up their information management programs and look at how to both identify needs and measure progress. And we've aligned our efforts, our work streams, with this idea of growing industry capacity, building a common collaborative framework, having a foundation for public and private owner leadership, and communications to foster vision and build communities. And interestingly, this framework is also embedded in a study that the Federal Highway Global Benchmarking Program just released this in the last week or so on BIM practices in highway infrastructure that looked at other countries and their progress and compared it to what we need to do here in the US. So you might want to have a look at that study just released by Federal Highway. Next slide, please. So in order to bring the program together, we formed a steering committee, and the steering committee has a very diverse makeup, which we felt was really important. We wanted to represent both public and private sector owners, and we have representatives from Microsoft, Amazon, and Kaiser on the private sector side, as well as public owners, Department of State, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, also Iowa Department of Transportation. We wanted to bring in the transportation and the building sectors. NIBS has traditionally worked more on the vertical building world, but one of the tenets of the program we're trying to establish here is that really the standards need to be consistent across the different vertical and civil infrastructures, and many of the suppliers, manufacturers, practitioners operate in both spaces. That came out clearly in that global study that Federal Highway did. It's come up before when we were looking at the study we did for Federal Highway that's actually led to the formation of the BIM for Bridges pooled fund. And when we talked to suppliers and practitioners, we found that, you know, the fabrication of steel beams and girders is done in the same plant. So we need to think about how to bring things together more effectively. We've also brought in practitioners. I'm not quite done yet, so could we go back? And I mentioned the work streams that we set up that also have a diverse background of organizations represented there. And we've been working closely with the Center for Digital Built Britain, and I think I identified previously an MOU we put together with the UK government, with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and CDB, Center for Digital Built Britain, works closely with them. So we're trying to learn what we can from these successful efforts internationally and apply them to our organization, our program here. Just to put this in context, the next slide now, the National BIM program for us at NIBS is a program of our BIM Council. We've been working on developing the National BIM standard, as I mentioned, for some time, but we don't feel like we've been able to make enough progress or be comprehensive enough in the development of that standard to encompass both buildings and infrastructure. So that is what's led us to form this National BIM program, establish the steering committee that I just identified, and build up a program plan based on the work streams that we went through previously. And we've, next slide, wanted to do this to bring together the standards perspective. We need better standards and more comprehensive standards to address the full scale of opportunities that we have. There are a number of international standards that we already use here in the US. We're talking, we've mentioned IFC a few times here, Building Smart International's information exchange standard that's used to exchange information in initially with buildings and now more and more with infrastructure. And also their ISO standards. ISO 19650 is the standard that the UK started with in their national program to adopt standardization of BIM, and then since became an ISO standard. And we're looking at the use of ISO 19650 as a way to expand and provide a more comprehensive framework of owner and practitioner project requirements that address not just information exchange, but also practice, and use that with the complementing our national BIM standards. We're working with ASHRAE, who's the US tag through the American National Standards Institute, on the what the requirements to begin the adoption of 19650 here as part of this program. And the other important thing is to bring in the contracting perspective. The model contracts that AIA and AGC offer provide guidance on the use of BIM, but they reference a number of things that could be better standardized, and so we definitely want to work with that, and also to bring in the many proprietary standards that organizations have. Owner organizations, many of the federal agencies have in-house standards that cover a lot of what's required to contract for building information modeling and building information management, but it's not a comprehensive framework that's available to all of them to use. So that's another part of the challenge we hope to address here. So next slide. We've, as I mentioned, formed this steering committee. It has broad representation. They're meeting regularly, guiding the work streams that are developing the program plan around these focus areas. We've been collaborating with the Center for Digital Build Britain, and we're looking to learn from and understand what's going on internationally. We're participating in the global BIM network to that end. Many of us involved have a long history working with Building Smart International on the information exchange standardization side, and we look to bring together them along with other organizations here in the US, government agencies, and the private sector to support this plan that we're putting together. We're nearly completed with the plan now, and we'll be circulating it and putting it out for comment by the public in the next several weeks here, and then looking for support in terms of funding so that we can take what the plan recommends and move it forward over the next 3 years, 5 years to deliver some significant changes and results in this area where there is a lot going on, because we need to do a lot and we have some great opportunities in front of us. So thank you for the opportunity to share what we're doing and what we're working on. You can learn more at NIB's website and look up National Building BIM program there, and you can get more information. I appreciate the opportunity. George, I turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate it. Those were great presentations by Roger and Mike, and thanks for that overview of what's going on nationally. I think that's really great information. Now we're going to move on to our agencies and what their plans are for digital delivery, making the model legal document, model development standards, and things of that nature. Next slide. We're pretty much everyone on this call, I'm going to guess, whether you're a contractor, consultant, agency, federal highways, vendor, or whoever, is going to be interested in this moving forward with how do we make the model legal document? How do we do the various things that are associated with it? These 3 presentations by agencies are going to show how they're moving in that direction and try to answer some of the tough questions. So, you know, I think everyone knows that if you can get engagement and communication, it's going to help move forward. But there's a lot of questions that are revolving right now. How do you review the model? How do you sign and seal? What happens with proprietary software, and what's going on with IFC and Open BIM standards? Well, I think you're going to learn a little bit about that with these 3 presentations, and then we would really encourage you to put some questions in the chat. We'll leave about 10 minutes after to go through those questions. So I'm going to very quickly introduce our 3 presenters. We have Marsha Yoki from Michigan DOT, and she's going to be presenting with Dan Belcher. Marcia is a bridge support engineer, and frankly, I apologize for this. I'm not quite sure what Dan's role is, but he is at a high level and will be helping out with that as well. Laura Thompson is with the Illinois Tollway, and her focus is on delivering major capital projects. We're also going to wrap up with Alan Melly. He is with the PennDOT, and he is leading the charge for their digital delivery initiative. So if you would go to the next slide. Oh, it looks like we're there. Sorry about that. And Marcia, take it away.
All right, thank you, George. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead, next slide. So this is our digital delivery roadmap in Michigan, where we've basically been working through three things. How do you standardize the data that designers submit? How do you hand off that data to construction, the contractors, the construction field staff? And once you have that project information data, how do you move that over to asset management? So, this is not our only roadmap. It is always changing as we have to adjust to new things. So as far back as 2013, we were starting to standardize what that data submittal process was. We were having road and bridge designers submit their base files, their 2D line work as part of the reference information documents. We started requiring that roads submit their 3D road models with RID in 2015. And, some of the contractors were starting to use this data for AMG, for survey staking. But, we had to accept as we were going into 2016, 2017, that, we had this huge data wall between what design was doing and what construction could do. And so I think the issues you're always seeing are sometimes they're software, sometimes they're people. So, we couldn't find like good model viewers for the field. And, while our office staff are great with CAD, that's not really what field staff grow up working off of. So, we had like this huge skill gap. And so designers felt like they were creating all this data that was not getting used. So we moved into a process called Project PDF, where, we were basically moving away from being dependent on that 11 by 17 plan set. We were adding in levels, layers, colors, doing roll plots. So you started to look at the screen differently. So you weren't thinking about printing all the time. And so we've been in this process for a while, and I think we're finally at a point where we're starting to move into model delivery. Bridge has been a little bit behind road in terms of we're just starting to get into modeling, but we're taking a leap forward where we're doing a 3D bridge model delivery pilot with Bridge right now. And then we've been very fortunate to establish a digital delivery steering committee, and they're going to be responsible for approving, a lot of the ideas, including road model delivery pilots that we want to see get off the ground so that everybody's moving forward together. Next slide. So it's wonderful if you can create a new process, if you can model something new, but it's only as good as it can be checked and reviewed. So I think one of the things that we've done really well in Michigan is, finding ways to make our review process collaborative, making it digital, putting everybody in one place for those comments. It used to be that we were marking up plan sets with pens and forcing, project managers to merge all of those comments together, which was a huge time sink. But for a long time, we've been using Bluebeam studio sessions to review plan sets. So, this shot up here on the screen, top center, it's, this is a culvert plan set, but this is what we do for project PDF. It is digital. This file is integrated with ProjectWise. It's real-time collaboration. You can see comments that other people are making. You can comment on comments that people are making. And then we can track these comments and responses and export them out. You can see the commenting field at the bottom. So this is another way where we're moving people from something that was kind of siloed, and we're putting them in all one place and making them digital. We don't have something that works quite this well yet for our model reviews. So people are, submitting their 3D models with RID, and we have 3D models for our bridge pilot. We want to get to this final step where we're using something like iTwin Design Review or Synchro, where you actually get to make the comments and the dashboards track the comments and responses in these viewers. But for right now, it's pretty effective. We can track comments in spreadsheets. We can create screenshots and put them in these spreadsheets. And, we create review DGNs that allow reviewers to annotate and comment on top of the model without, being in the actual design file. Next. So our process from getting to that 2D plan set to where we want to be with digital delivery is sort of these 4 things. We did the project signature sheet. We started delivering RID models. We moved into project PDF, and now we're piloting model delivery. So one of the first things that George brought up was how do you sign and seal these sheets? So as far back as 2000, we had like e-signatures approved. So we've had this project signature sheet for a while. It's a spreadsheet. There's some macros so that you can add as many lines as you want. But what's in there is a listing of every file that is a contract document. So it could be just your regular PDFs of the road design, the bridge design, etc. But it's also set up that any models that are contract files are in there. So you list everything, out, and it can be broken apart by the different consultants or internal staff. So whoever's responsible for signing it can sign it here. I think COVID accelerated this a bit for us. We had been using this and then, revised in 2020 just, to be COVID safe. And as of April 2021 of this year, all of our projects this is how we sign. We don't do the wet signatures on plan sets anymore. So, this was something that had to be approved, but it's been with us for a long time and has positioned us that now we can kind of submit anything as part of the contract. And then, it's really important to just get people into the process. So by delivering these RID models, we were training designers on how to deliver the models. What's the best practices for creating those models, making sure that you take them seriously instead of cutting corners and fudging things when you're creating that plan set. And we were able to share data with the field from these RID models. And so, these people who become really good at it, these champions who are good at design, or the field staff who know how to take these data, help guide us forward. And then Project PDF has kept us, moving towards screens, taking us away from paper. It's been a chance to change the process and hear what people liked and didn't like, figure out where our pain points are, figure out what works well as we move into that next phase. And I think the biggest thing as we move into model delivery is just engaging with everybody along the way, taking the complaints from the people who don't like Project PDF, and then, finding out what people want in those models, talking to other states about what worked well as well. And then this last slide goes to Dan. Next.
So at Michigan, it's primarily been grassroots to get to digital delivery. There's certain pockets in design and construction that we share our vision, and we're really trying to get to where we want to go. But recently, we've been focused more on gaining leadership buy-in and to get an enterprise goal. So to do that, and I guess peer pressure might be not the best word to use, but we've relied on that. We've met with our leadership and provided information from other states, Pennsylvania, Utah, and it's important for them to see what other states are doing to achieve these goals. And then we've also had some discussions with some of the innovative contractors. We had Site Tech, which is a Trimble reseller, talk to our leadership and talk about the importance of AMG and how they're supporting the contractors in saving money, increasing efficiencies, and then just showing the time and money that other states are saving on these pilots. Several states have had pilots, especially in the bridge side. And then partnering with industry is very important because the squeaky wheel tends to get the grease. So if we don't have contractors on our side moving towards this vision, we'll be stopped in our tracks. So, find the champions among the consultants and contractors and encourage them to talk with leadership. And we're at the point now where we're requesting a department goal. We want an overall goal to get to digital delivery by a certain date, and kind of the steps to get there. We want the department to agree on that. Because pulling along some of the areas in the department is going to be tough. So if there's an overall goal, that will help us. The executives on our side will help us pull those areas along.
Well, let's move forward. Why don't we get Laura Thompson next? We may have lost Dan there. So Laura, you want to take over?
Yes, I can do that. We can switch to the next slide though. So the TOEI is in its 10th year of its 15-year, $14 billion capital program, the Move Illinois program, which has been great for our initiative. So the TOEI's initiative to implement BIM started in 2014 when FYI models were required by all designers to be included in all contract advertisements. In 2017, we were able to start our first pilot project, a rural standalone interchange at Illinois 47 and I-88. And this was completed in 2019. This project has since completed a full BIM cycle. In doing so, we were able to try new innovations, such as having the designer provide a model-centric design and seal the model as a legal document. Being more model-centric, we eliminated cross-section sheets and drainage profiles from the printed drawings and placed the model in the contract hierarchy. We worked with industry to identify the appropriate deliverables for contractors, including file types, such as the XMLs and the DGNs. With the advertisement, we securely locked and worked out a solution similar to other states for signing and sealing the models. In construction, we worked with the contractor to identify field changes and adjust quantities accurately and timely. In doing so, we coordinated heavily with the designer for the required model changes. During construction, we were able to gather the data necessary to develop a full digital as-built with underground utility locations moved in 3D. So from this project, we took lessons learned and applied that to our I-490 advanced grading project currently in construction. This project followed the same recipe with the model as a legal document and is actively collecting utility data and as-built information, which we are using to build and outline our BIM program. We also have the I-57 and I-294 interchange, which did not have a model as a legal document, but the team is still collecting utility data and digital as-built information. Similar to our largest corridor reconstruction project at the moment, the I-294 Central Tri-State reconstruction, where subsurface utility information is being collected and grabbed. In our active design pilots, we have the US 20 over I-90 project, which is coordinating closely with our DOT partner, IDOT, on our model reviews. This is intended to have a model as a legal document, where the model, they're also modeling numerous bridge elements such as the piles, and we hope to issue this model in an FYI manner at advertisement. Our last ongoing pilot project is the subsequent project that was mentioned earlier as an ongoing contract, where the I-490 pavement and bridge construction, which is building on top of the advanced grading project. And this is anticipated to hit the street next year. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Currently, we submit most project models as an FYI, which helps the contractor bid the contract, but this does not necessarily hold them to build to that model. So industry feedback early on indicated concern with the FYI model due to the possibility of a discrepancy between the FYI model and the plans. In order to rectify this concern, it requires the model to be placed in the contract hierarchy of Volume 1. As displayed here, the pilot projects that we have advertised placed the drawings over the model, but then excluded specific drawings, namely the cross-sections and the drainage profiles. Additionally, by signing and sealing the model, we provide our engineering approval and transfer these models to the contractor at advertisement using our web-based online plan room. To date, we have had to provide a workaround to sign and seal these files because our legislation still requires a PDF stamp for drawings and calculations. To seal the models, we provided a signature page with the seals and the exact files listed. We also included location numbers to help identify the model names and locations. And shown here on this slide is an example of a file map, which we provided information to the bidder where the files were in relation to the naming convention and who sealed them. This legislation needs to be modified to allow for digital files themselves to be signed and sealed, as well as to make sure files are securely locked from malicious modifications. This needed change to the Professional Engineers Act should eliminate designers' concern and provide safe protections to our professional engineers. We are looking to our local ACEC organization to help us with this change. Next slide. So our first few pilot projects had a plethora of lessons learned, as do most. We hit many hurdles, but the earliest was related to the detail a designer needed to go into for each milestone submittal. We found often that the designer was taking the model farther than preferred due to the inevitable design changes in the progression. This caused some avoidable rework that may not have occurred if we had been more proactive in developing detailed scopes early on. From here, we knew we needed to establish better standards and began working on an LOD table. Over the past year, we have coordinated heavily with our partners at IDOT in order to establish some consistency amongst the agencies, which often utilize many of the same consultants. We plan to release the LOD table within the next week for agency review. So shown here is a snip of what we've put together. And one aspect we pride ourselves on is that the developed table is going down to each element to capture detail on and describe it from the L100 all the way to the L500. We have also developed templates for different types of projects to help for scoping purposes. Next slide. So the piece many outside agencies and firms have interest in is our proposed timeline for implementation, which we actually just released last week. We have been working on fine-tuning our BIM manual based on the lessons learned and feedback from our pilot projects. So our plan is to roll this manual out in our annual spring 2022 manual updates. The plan is to incorporate the LOD table mentioned earlier and guidance on utility data collection. The manual would be scoped on specific projects, but most importantly would be available to the industry for insight on what is to come. By 2023, we plan to complete all digital reviews utilizing Bentley's iTwins for all contracts with the models. And we have recently acquired this software and have found it to be instrumental for our milestone reviews by both internal and external participants. Additionally, we hope to have the modifications necessary to the state legislature with regards to the long-term storage of files. This currently only includes XML files, and we believe the inclusion of DGN files would reduce the degradation of data. Also, as mentioned earlier, by the end of 2023, we hope to have updated the Professional Engineers Act to include those digital signatures. Because the transition for the industry will need some time, we are targeting 2024 for the rollout of all ongoing projects to start transitioning. So by 2024, we hope to issue all models in the contract hierarchy and cross sections then be issued as an FYI. We believe this will emphasize the transition better and support those contractors that have voiced their concern. In 2025, we anticipate furthering the information included in the model to include bridge details. We would need industry support for this leap, including the rebar fabricators and installers, which are often small and minority. The tollway prides itself on the inclusion of new and diverse firms, so decisions made have to accommodate accordingly. And lastly, by 2026, we hope to have all projects utilizing the model as a legal document. Our hope would be that this would allow a time for the transition of the BIM process with our industry. Ultimately, the model may be placed higher in the contract hierarchy than currently, but we hope to reduce, if not eliminate, the drawings. So the tollway is enthusiastic and optimistic on the implementation of BIM, and with a little more work, hopefully we'll see this transition. I believe I'm passing it off to Alan.
Yeah, great. That's great presentation, Laura. Thank you so much. That was really good for both you and Marcia. Alan, you want to tell us about PennDOT?
Sure, I'd be happy to. You want to move to the next slide there, Randy? All right. So PennDOT's digital transformation initiative has been dubbed Digital Delivery Directive 2025. I have been tasked with leading this up. So we started this initiative back in early 2020, where we created that strategic plan. What is that roadmap and how do we get to that end goal? That end goal of being that model is the legal document. So we come up with a vision that by 2025, our construction projects will be bid using 3D technology and no longer be in that traditional construction plan format. So how do we get there? How do we reach that 2025? And it's an aggressive time frame, but we laid out this roadmap and worked with our partners across the state. We are a rather large organization, so really trying to steer that ship is not an easy task. So we laid out the strategic plan in 2020, really with those workshops, meeting with our contractors, our consultants, our sister agencies, DEP, Federal Highways, Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. So gathered that input statewide to create that strategic plan. So out of that strategic plan, we developed this roadmap. The roadmap really lays out, here like in 2021 is really those quick start, those quick kills that we could, accomplish early, build those early wins, start getting people excited about this transformation because this is a big change. It's you can look at it by, going from, the drawing boards to, CAD. So it's that big of a change for our organization. So really laying out, those quick start tools here in 2021, the guide rail as built pilots, and so forth that I'll touch on here in just a minute. In 2022, we're going to start introducing the roadway modeling requirements. As we build on that, we move into 2023, where we're starting to introduce the bridge components into digital delivery. 2024 is where we're going to start introducing that asset management and drainage component. And in 2025, we'll have that model as the legal document and provide no plan sheets whatsoever to the consultants or to the contractors to build our projects. So really to make this successful, we've laid out, there's a couple points that, we're managing that pace of change, which is very difficult. Helping people perceive the progress, create a safe space for experimentation because things are going to go wrong. Empower those pilot project teams to speak up and, let us know what's working, what's not working, and utilize our construction partners. Next slide, Randy. So we broke the initiative down into really 3 phases. the phase one was that initial planning and stakeholder, coordination, which we finished this past year. We also created, the digital delivery website, where we keep everything up to date as far as what pilot projects are going on, sharing information that we've developed, that we've created, for anybody else to, that is going on this journey to help out. So the information is out there as we are developing it. That way we're communicating with our internal and external stakeholders as well. So moving into phase two, which is currently underway, we're mapping our processes and developing those the standards and guidance to support that phased in approach of our pilot projects. We're trying to that agile approach where we crawl, walk, and then run, and taking small bites out of the apple. We're developing the interim model development standards and model review checklist, and the education and training is crucial as we move through this. Again, this is new to most people in the department, so a lot of education and training and getting that consistent message out to our organization is critical. And the pilot projects, we're looking at testing these various use cases. So we have the guide rail digital as-built pilot. Now initially there is no 3D model that is being required for the guide rail pilot. It's that transfer of information. It's the transfer of information from construction into our asset management system. So it's a spreadsheet that has all of the relevant data that we need or somebody needs along the way, either in design, construction, or asset management, that is being collected by the contractor. We're looking at the single project PDF that is actually in the design process right now, where we are eliminating the construction plan sheets. We are making one large PDF sheet, getting that contractors and our inspectors used to looking at, their devices for these projects instead of relying on those individual plan sheets. Getting into the existing ground confidence level and roadway modeling, looking at all of the, that model quality survey. The existing surveys that, we produce are not dense enough for what is required for modeling to produce those that quality survey and that quality model off of that survey. So we're looking at all of those aspects as we're moving through. Getting into the bridge modeling, there will be 3 bridges that we will be looking at modeling for the 2023 construction season. So we are advancing on that end, looking at our drainage modeling, going to be identifying those projects to be let in 2024. With all of these, we're looking at, how are we going to inspect these? How are we going to review those models? All of that coordination, and, we're looking at various programs to do that, looking at the iTwin design review for our reviews, and looking at Synchro Field for our construction inspection. So then it all goes into phase 3, where we will, focus on really standardizing that digital delivery method, that we developed in the pilot phase, in that, in the phase 2, and really updating our policies, standards, and publications. You can go to the next slide, Randy. So really the some of the challenges that we have encountered to date really is, the first one is standardization. Again, we are a very large state. We have 11 different engineering districts, and sometimes it feels like we have 11 different departments of transportation, the way they, some of the requirements that each of them, put on either their consultants or their designers. So we're really taking this opportunity to implement that consistency across the department, utilizing those model standards and teaching everybody the process to go through. So that way we have a standard deliverable, no matter where you are in the state. The contractor will know exactly what they are getting, what files they are getting it in. So standardization has been, a challenge, but we are meeting that head on. So The next one is really trying to manage that pace of change. You know, we're trying to take those small steps to look at the various, you know, use cases to advance this initiative. But we do have a very aggressive timeline to meet. That 2025 is going to be here before you know it. You know, so we try to provide as much technical support as we can through all of these pilots. In each aspect, we look at providing at least 3 to 4 pilots per area that we're testing. That way we have fallback plans because of that aggressive time schedule. If one, you know, so happens to be delayed, we have backups for those issues. Identifying, obtaining the, you know, that right technology. Just like anybody that works for state government, you know, it takes a long time to procure software. So that has definitely been a challenge initially, even is procuring any additional software is taking a large time. And then into that proprietary solution, you know, we will have to figure out the best way to share that information with our contractors. You know, today we know we can share the, you know, those land XML files for the 3D surfaces and break lines, but, you know, sharing that whole model with 3D objects will be, you know, much more difficult. So we'll need to assess what tools, you know, the contractors will need to view that same information we're developing. So again, for the pilots, we're looking at, you know, using the Bentley Synchro Field for our construction staff. And, you know, we'll work with our, you know, our contractors and vendors to find that, you know, that solution for, you know, being able to digest this information, you know, out of the pilots. So, you know, we hope here in the future with the open BIM standards that we can simply share that IFC file, you know, that the contractors can use whatever software they decide. Next slide. So we are early in the process. So we don't have a lot of technical challenges or know what technical challenges that we're going to face at this point. But some of the stakeholders' concerns that, you know, have been raised is really, you know, how that, you know, quality review process will change, you know, through the model-based environment. So we are looking at, you know, creating a process in which we check the, you know, the integrity of the model directly in ORD. Using the checklist and for design QA reviews performed by, you know, our non-CAD users, because we don't want all of the users in CAD. We're looking at the iTwin design review. So we will train all of our users on all of these systems as we hit these milestones. And then what, you know, are the contractors going to need? So, you know, we're engaging with our APC. APC is very similar to a lot of other states' AGC to really understand what information they need. You know, so we have, you know, technical working groups developed with APC to work through a lot of these issues up front and really find out what it is that, you know, they're struggling with. You know, so that way we can help facilitate those, you know, educational workshops, and, you know, we, you know, try to get out as much information as we can, you know, to, you know, at these conferences that they hold. So, you know, we provide, and it's that back and forth communication with not only our contractors, but our consultants as well, because, you know, it's great if it works, you know, for the department, but it has to work for our partners as well. But lastly, you know, the stakeholders were concerned about signing and sealing those models. So, you know, how are we going to do that? So we have been working with our board of registration to, you know, present what options are, you know, are available. So we've had, you know, demonstrations on the, you know, blockchain technology, which looks very promising. But initially, to get through our pilots, we are going to fall back on the examples that other DOTs have utilized at this point, where, you know, you're signing and sealing basically a list of the project files with the time, date stamps for that model as the legal document. So until we get to any other advanced technology, we will be able to fall back on that. That has been presented to our board, and they have been receptive, and it meets you know, all of the requirements for signing and sealing our files. Next slide, Randy. So as we look forward to the adoption of the open BIM standards, you know, for now we'll utilize the Land XML for, you know, geometry and 3D surfaces, but we really hope to benefit from, you know, those IFC standards as we progress. So, and we really want to standardize the way we use and manage the information throughout the life cycle of these projects. You know, it all starts with, you know, defining that information requirements that we want for design to construction and construction to asset management. So we plan to continue to leverage our GIS and find ways to connect that information, you know, with the 3D models themselves. And because really the ultimate goal overall is, you know, to be able to have access to all of this information whenever we need it. So with that, I can open it up to any questions.
Yeah, Alan, thank you very much. Great presentation with a lot of really good information. We have a couple questions from the audience, but before we get to those, we've got about 5 minutes. I'm gonna ask the panelists a question. You know, I think a lot of DOTs are curious that they've got to go to their leadership and they have to convince them of why this is the right direction to go. So I'm going to start with Alan. Did you have to do that? Did your leadership come to you, or how did you overcome that to move in this direction and have your 2025 directive?
I think that is one of the most beneficial things that we've had happen was it really started at the top. It's with Melissa Patula. She is now actually the executive deputy secretary. So she's right at the top. So we have, you know, leadership that is really behind this. She was the one who actually came up with that, you know, the date of 2025 that, you know, really drove us that, you know, this is what can be done. So we have executive support all the way through the department. So we have not had to come through that challenge as far as convincing our executives of why this is really needed. It was, you know, driven top down for us. So it's been very beneficial to us.
Sure, that makes it tons easier. Marcia, how about you guys? Did you have to convince leadership, or did they come to you?
So Dan has been working on this for a lot longer than I have. But it's always, I think, been bottom to top, pushing leadership to do it.
And
So
was there anything in particular that maybe helped push it over so that you're actually moving in this direction?
Well, you know, so there's all different people in leadership at our DOT. So I think it comes back to some of that peer pressure piece. By having one bureau be more interested and going in that direction, I think it pushed things forward. So when Bridge said, oh, okay, when Bridge leadership said, we really want to do this, it was a good way to push road to go further forward. And we have at times had, you know, leadership is always changing. Some people have been more committed to it than others.
Awesome, thank you. So Laura, I'm going to switch gears a little bit for you and ask, we've had some questions asking about as-built and who might be tasked with that, the contractor or the designer. How are you guys dealing with that at Illinois Tollway?
So our agency, actually, the as-built model becomes the responsibility of our construction manager. So we have an outside construction manager overseeing the work. Now, oftentimes the designer is part of that team and they are involved. And then they often do get information from the contractor as well. But the construction manager team owns that model.
Okay, and you know, one of the questions I know we came up with early on was, if you're not part of that model development, sometimes it's really hard to get in there and understand what the original designer did. Have you guys had any issues with that at all?
I would say it's still a hesitation, concern from our designers and our construction management teams as well, which often what we have seen is that's when they bring the designer onto their team in order to bridge that gap. So they are learning. I still think there's a little bit more to learn to get caught up to speed on how to, bridge that gap.
All right, great, thank you. And I saw that you had answered one of the questions about IFC, DGN, XMLs, and things of that nature. But I also wanted to go back to Marcia and Alan and ask them, how you are dealing with the different file formats and how you're going to issue those, what will be legal and what will be for information only. So Marcia, you want to start on your side?
I'm sorry, can you ask that question again? So
Yeah,
you're asking
question
whether an
really
IFC
was,
file would be legal?
that was, what Laura had mentioned was that they're using XML and DGN file formats, and maybe not IFC at the moment. It seems, if I remember correctly, that Bridge is a little bit further along with IFC, at least Building Smart, in their progression of making those available. Are you guys using IFC files? And if you are, how is that working? And if you're not, are you using more XML and DGN?
We're using, so on the Bridge side, we're using primarily DGNs, which I mean, they can be exported as IFC, but for the time being, that's where we're at. It's what Bentley uses the most, and we can also make XMLs contractual. It just goes back to that same sign and seal spreadsheet that we have.
Awesome. Alan, we've got about 30 seconds. Do you want to respond on how you guys are using DGN, XML, and if you're using IFC yet?
We are not using IFC yet, but as we develop this, we are developing in a way that we are ready for IFC when it takes effect. So right now it's the XML and DGNs that we will provide.
Excellent, thank you. So there also were a couple of other questions that have come through. One of the ones is talking about targeted outcome of model data. I think we might get to that in our panel discussion, but let's move on to the panel discussion now. Any questions that we don't get to, we will put out after the webinar and try to answer all the questions. And so we'll go from there, but we're going to move on now to our panel discussion for model development standards. So we've got a kind of a range of agency, ACEC, contractors, and industry expert today. And what we're looking at talking about is, how you're going to move along with model development standards, how you're going to get the model as the legal document, and get those perspectives of each one of these. So next slide, please, Randy. So and let's go one more. Today, what I'm going to do is between Alexa Mitchell and myself, we're going to be asking some questions and some follow-ups. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how do we nationally move along with models of the legal document? And we've got different stakeholders that are involved in how we move that forward. We're also going to talk about how we're advancing models of the legal document. And we'll get into the discussion about level of development, model development standards, and things of that nature. And then, lessons learned from other industries. How are other industries putting this together? So will you move to the next slide, please, Randy? Today, in fact, today our panelists are John Wilkerson from Michigan DOT, Eric Silwick of Sunk Construction, Will Sharp of HDR, and he's going to be representing ACEC, and Francesca Meyer, probably know her as Chess Meyer, from Fair Cape Consulting. These four are going to be having sort of a discussion with some questions that we've started out with. If you have any that you would like any of these to respond to, please put it in the chat and we'll try to look at what is maybe the most burning questions, or we'll continue on with sort of this line of questions that we have. So why don't you move to the next slide, and we'll start with our first set of questions. And basically what we want to know is what concerns do you have with the model being the legal document? And so I think that whether it's agency, contractor, or ACEC, or anyone in this industry, it's interesting to know what the concerns are. So Eric, why don't we start with you? From your perspective as a contractor, what concerns do you have today with models legal document?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much, George. There are a ton of assumptions that go into models today. about quality of data, about consistency of data, about who's responsible for what. And as we move towards model as a legal document, there's a lot of documentation being created around what I can rely upon when it comes to construction. And while we're moving towards that future, today there's a lot of confusion around that subject, and it's difficult for me as a constructor to go from one client to another client and expect the same kind of model, and even the same data sets, and also even to go from the same client to the same client with a different design and engineering team involved. We see differences in those data sets as well. And so we have estimators that have had an opportunity to get in and, for example, in Utah, be able to use a 3D model to generate quantities. And if we have them later work on an Arizona DOT project, the quantities that they're pulling look different, right? The data sets look different, the file configurations look different. And so there's a lot of inconsistency. And so I'm very excited as I look forward into the future. I think about where our industry even was 10 years ago on this subject and how far we've come. And so I look forward to the next 10 years when we have a lot of these standards in place and our estimators and constructors can have a consistent experience. But for right now, I think that it's kind of getting in and learning every single time, right? And I was trying to think of how to kind of outline the risk and how we think about these things when we do receive digital data. And it made me think of moments where I've had a less than optimal experience at a food restaurant, right? And if somebody told me part of my chicken was bad, I would probably not eat any of that chicken, right? There's no way for me to go in and easily be able to distinguish between good and bad because it looks very similar, right? And I know that the vertical side has gone through the same thing, and as a result, they've developed their level of development standards. But every time an estimator is given a data set, they have to think and try to figure out how to know what parts of the data are good, what they can rely upon, and also ultimately what we can truly think of as a legal document. And the further we step into that future, I think it'll be more clear and we can continue to consume more of that data.
Awesome, thanks, Eric. You know, let's move on to sort of, oops, sir, I've got a little bit of feedback. Let's move on to how ACEC is looking at this. So, Will, can you kind of talk to this subject as well of, from a consultant perspective, what concerns do you have today with the model's legal document?
Yeah, thanks, George. Great question. Yeah, this has been a key discussion topic the last several years at our ACEC national conferences, both with our transportation committees and our risk management committees. And many of the ACEC members have high-level concerns with things like data misuse, data security, and how the different disciplines are going to coordinate on developing a contractual model-based digital deliverable. And one of the main concerns, George, is there's a tremendous amount of digital data provided with the model as legal document, you know, construction level accuracy type data. And many consultants are concerned, you know, how do I QC this data? You know, how are things like standard of care and errors and omissions going to be viewed? And I think the key on this is we just need to be very clear on the expectations and the requirements of those contractual digital deliverables. I can tell you, George, ACEC's been working very closely with John Wilkerson and the JTC EES committee, you know, for several years to clearly articulate our concerns and also work collaboratively with AASHTO on developing more of a framework that the state DOTs can use to clearly convey these model development standards, you know, such as level of development and model element breakdowns.
Thanks, Will. Great response. You know, I think that there's a lot of concern with consultants and even DOTs for that matter of, you know, what is the professional liability of an engineer, regardless of our discussion on what signing and sealing means, whether it's literally doing it with the files or doing it with a memo. But those are great concerns. John, how about from an agency perspective? What concerns do you guys have as an agency with the model as the legal document today?
I think building on kind of what the others have said, its consistency is a big concern. And how do we provide that oversight of the data and making sure that the data that comes in and out of each process is good for the user that needs to consume it? How do we pass on that wisdom in the conventional process through a QA/QC and build on that to make the model-based processes more efficient. So we're looking at the true design intent. How do we clearly communicate that? And making sure we're all going in a consistent direction with the design and construction teams with a pathway along that idea of partnership. To really get at one of the other concerns is, how do you change the culture? How do you train people without leaving anybody behind? So we need to make the process more efficient while considering the downstream user. And going back to what I think Roger had said earlier, I think that idea of leveraging digital delivery as a tool.
Yeah, that's a great point. Hey, before we move on to the next question, I'm going to ask a follow-up, but I'm actually going to have Chess answer this. One of the things that Will talked about was, all of the information that's associated with the model, and now there's the concern about the liability. With designers using a model to create sheets, where do you see the difference between sheet production using a model and actually delivering the model as the legal document?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that the starting point is that in roadway, certainly we've been using models to develop sheets for longer than I've been an engineer. All the way back to the 90s, we've been using models to create sheets, and it's a very efficient process if a sheet is your end goal. We know exactly what to do. We know where it gets quicker and easier. But over the past decade, we've certainly learned from contractors what the drawbacks are from that approach, and where it costs money and where it adds uncertainty into the construction process, especially now that they're using machine control. They tell us all the different ways that they're having to reverse engineer our models and tweak things because material balances aren't there, because they're so precise, even on those even on resurfacing projects. If you're doing any kind of slope correction or anything like that, they're incredibly precise, and they're better able to plan, prepare, and refine. So once we start to use models and look at them as that ultimate deliverable, it shifts the balance of who's doing that work. But until we address those issues that Eric brought up, we're not capturing the efficiency that we need to capture, because the contractor still has trust issues and they still have to redo that work anyway. So until we can address those kinds of issues in terms of, being able to determine the quality of the information, having it consistent, we're not going to have those hypothetical efficiencies that we talk about. And some of the other concerns that I have in terms of models as the contract documents is that durability of the data and corruption with data exchange. Even from one version of one specific software product to another, you can have issues in terms of being able to access all of the information, or the information getting corrupted. And so until we have that open data standard where we can pick from a menu of software tools and not be locked into that specific version of the software that was used to create the model, I still have concerns until we can get there.
That day can't come too soon, right?
Cannot.
Yeah, and so before I turn it over to Alexa for the next question, I know our contractors told us early on that we became maybe too concerned about the data from the standpoint of our template drops were way too dense, and they said they would get that information and the first thing they had to do was start stripping things out right and left. So going to that consistency point, being consistent and having a process that every contractor knows what they're going to get is a huge deal. Alexa and Randy, you want to move the slide? Thank you.
Thanks, George. All right, so I think we started talking about this question here, but why are model development standards important? In other words, what do we need to do to make us feel more comfortable with model of the legal document as a standard practice in the US? So let's start with Eric. and hear the contractor perspective on why do you think model development standards are important and what problems they're going to solve.
Yeah, model standards are really going to allow us to be able to use this data. As you've heard several times on this call, a lot of contractors get in and rebuild things, right? A lot of times in the past when I've received digital data, it's been given with a disclaimer that says you are not allowed to use this data, but here it is. Right, and in my mind, that's one side of this pendulum. That's one side of this extreme of how you can transfer data between two parties, right? To be able to say, here you go, don't use it. And I think the other far right side is to say everything in here is perfect. And I don't know that we necessarily even want to get to that point, right? The engineering teams should be focusing on the engineering challenges. And as Ches discussed earlier, to know exactly what you're at risk for, I have difficulty seeing anybody wanting to say I'm at risk for everything that could possibly be associated with this project, right? And if you think about what's in between those two things, you have moments where you say, I can guarantee that the data in this land XML file is good for alignments, horizontal and vertical, right? Or I can guarantee that this finished grade surface is accurate to, within whatever, half an inch or something like that. And those are the things that I think really do a lot of the blocking and tackling that allow us to be able to get in and utilize that data. Right, every contractor knows that the value that we add to this process is figuring out construction means and methods. It's solving which equipment do we want to use and how do we want to cycle things. We don't add value when we get in and rebuild a surface or rebuild an alignment to work on Trimble gear as opposed to in the adjacent format that it was provided in, right? And so these standards will allow us to be able to have crystal clear communication on both sides of the fence on here's the data that I'm giving you, here are the ways you can and cannot use this. And then from there, knowing that we can get in and use that is going to save us a ton of time and again, allow us to focus on where we add value. And I think until there's those standards in place and until that development is done around both we've been discussing IFC and Land XML, but until those kind of languages are developed, right? And then the conversation on each side is formalized. It's going to be really difficult to have those conversations and then create predictability when it comes to execution and other aspects of construction.
Thanks. And so you heard the contractor perspective, right? In terms of we don't need everything to be perfect. We need to manage risk. So from an agency perspective, John, what do you think are the key components to come to a balance here?
Well, I think it starts with, as we were already talking about, what is the acceptable use of this information I'm providing, right? And what is the use case that I'm focusing on? And it really starts back at scoping. And when we start looking at these parts of a model development standard, level development is like one of the foundational pieces and that you try to build base definitions on that can apply not just at a job level, but at going back down at an agency level and then even at a national standard. So in the JTCS, we talk a lot more about this national standard. So something that ties back to, if you look at special provisions on a project, and then you have your agency spec book, and then you have the Code of Federal Requirements, right? That same structure. And so a lot of this stuff gets built out of those different areas. But the pieces that we talk about, we take and we look at a foundational definition for level development, and then we look at a model element breakdown structure, which is like a table of all the elements you might have on a project. But it's important that those are at an element level and not necessarily at an entire model, because Eric needs to know which elements, kind of like the chicken, right? If his chicken's bad, if part of the chicken's bad, then he's not going to eat the whole thing. Well, in our case, we have multiple elements, so we need to let them know which parts are bad, so they just don't eat that part, but they can consume the rest of their meal, right? Maybe the potatoes are fine. So really, it starts with that model progression specification that you have to build on that level development, right? So you can clearly communicate what you've done. And a lot of what we talk about nationally is focusing on the final turnover, but eventually you got to break it down to those milestones at the contract level. But so really just developing those fundamental communication tools so that the contractor knows how to work with it. And I think one of the things that makes us a little bit different in the infrastructure world is that surface and that location piece that you don't typically have to deal with as much in the building world. So how do we account for that in these definitions?
Great, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Will now that we've heard the contractor perspective and the owner perspective. Can you give us the consultant perspective to this question, to why model development standards are important?
No, certainly, Alexa, and great question. And I can tell you model development standards, I think, are the key from a consultant point of view to really clearly articulate what are those requirements for the model. You know, what are we really being asked to do? And I totally agree, John, with your point. You know, these model development standards, including level of development, including model element breakdown requirements, are important to actually have at the scoping of the project, you know, to understand exactly what we need to provide to meet the owner and the contractor's needs. And I do think that should carry all the way through and be part of the contractual deliverable. So that way, Eric on the backside, he understands, you know, element by element, you know, what's the accuracy of the information, even starting with the accuracy of the survey and the utility information that the design was based on. And also, what are the specific BIM uses for the information and limitations? And who's the engineer of record if it's a contractual digital deliverable. So I think that's really important. I think the model development standards, and like John said, we've really been working hard with JTCES to develop a national framework so we have consistency not only from project to project, but from state to state in the US as well. So I think those are all really important, so we fully understand the use of this model information. And I can tell you this model information, some information is going to be developed for automated machine guidance construction, but other information may be developed for things like visualization or quantities. You know, we need to clearly convey that to the owner and the contractor, just make sure we're on the same page. So that's what I would say on that one, Alexa.
Thanks, Will. So before I turn it over to George, Chess, you've heard what everybody said, and you've been following this for a long time through your research and other efforts by being involved in the industry. If you had to summarize it, what do you think are then the key components for us moving forward with model as legal document?
Sure. So just to zoom all the way back out, you know, I see standards as kind of like the Reformation that occurred in the Christian faith. Before the Reformation, only the church could read the Bible, only the church knew the will of God. And when we're doing model as a legal document in the absence of these standards, it's only really the designer, the person who built that model, not even necessarily the engineer in charge, who truly understands the quality of the information, where the dragons are, and what's wrong with it. And so I see standards as kind of the Reformation, what puts everything into a common language that everybody can understand and access and know what's in that model. And so for me, the key components are everything that you need to truly be able to understand the information. So you're going to have kind of a BIM manual, which is really just, or a model development standard. It's basically your CAD manual on steroids. It's going to cover all of those things in terms of how to organize the information within the file in the same way that the CAD manual did. So instead of having tables of 250 different levels and what line style and line weight and what have you, it's going to have the object version of that, the BIM version of that. So taking it away from, you know, lines, arcs, text, colors, and things like that, and into object-based. It's going to have your naming conventions and all of that. And then you're going to have this level of development tool that's going to communicate basically the authorized uses. And then there needs to be a way to organize the information within the model and assign that level of development to the individual elements. And that's your model progression specification, or whatever you want to call it. It's basically an inventory of the model organized by object type. And once you start to organize information, then you run into this conundrum of, how do I organize this information? And in the buildings world, they have classification standards. And so they had construction specifications generally were organized according to Omniclass Uniform Act classification system standards, and they were very object-based. And so it was pretty easy to take that standard and apply it to a BIM model where you were inserting a toilet object, and you had a toilet object classification, and you had a toilet object in your specifications, and it was a one-to-one correspondence between the three. And it's a little more challenging in terms of our infrastructure assets, and so that's something that we still need to work out as an industry. And it's critical if we want to get to this point where we actually have information flow from design to construction, and then from construction to maintenance, operations, asset management. Because if you're treating your fill slope differently in asset management to how you're treating it in design, and how you're building it in construction, and how you're accepting it in construction, it's really hard to have that information flow. So we need to be consistent in terms of how we're organizing our information. Would love to see a national standard, because I think there's a lot of efficiency there, but until we have that national standard, I don't think it matters that much until you start to get onto that journey of how that information flows beyond from construction into asset management realm.
Thanks, Jess. So we've got about 5 minutes left for a couple of questions. Before we get into that, I'm just going to throw in that UDOT has developed a model development standards manual. And one of the things that we were looking at is the communication, just like all of our 4 panelists said. We're communicating to designers what they need to do, and where their level of development for each one of the elements are, and then giving that information to the contractors so that they can see what their authorized use is. And I think that that's a huge step forward to a repeatable process that would be similar to a plan set. So with that, let's move to the next question, Randy. You know, as an industry, what are we doing to help the adoption of models as a legal document? John, do you want to talk a little bit about the JTC EES and even ACEC efforts and how model development standards apply?
Yeah, so it was a couple of years ago when we started this exercise. You know, one of the first things we did is we went and looked at, you know, what is the building world doing? What is the BIM form spec at the time, and where's BSI and where does that fit in? What are the what states have developed something? And we brought that all in, and we looked at it, and we you know, digested it, and then we set it aside and decided, okay, well, what do we need? So we really started from scratch to see where we'd come up with. And as we went, we continually got input from different states, or, you know, BSI USA was reestablished, and so we really try to bring that input from those other groups into what we're doing, and now we're actually having more conversations with NIBS. Back in July we had an engagement with ACEC, just vetting where we're at and how we push us forward. And so our goal is to start to get some draft standard level development framework published for pilot use sometime this year. And then continually engage in a feedback loop on how that's working, what is and what isn't working. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if that hit where you're going there, George.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think since we've got another question, I'm going to consolidate this one down, and Will, if you would address sort of the National BIM Council efforts and how model development standards apply, that would be great.
Sure, George, I'd be happy to. Yeah, there's definitely some similarities. As John mentioned, you know, we started with BIM form and some of those criteria. We've actually had recent discussions with NIBS on what they're doing on LOD and model element breakdowns and some of the things that we're doing. So we're definitely trying to tie that together. Also, NIBS recently created, Roger Grant mentioned it, the National BIM Program Steering Committee. And there's actually several of us from the infrastructure side that are on that committee and really providing that horizontal, input into the overall standards. So I do think we're really trying to leverage the work that's been done before and, take full advantage of that. But we also recognize on the horizontal side that, like John mentioned, our projects are different. The differences are that we are moving to model as a legal document and planless digital delivery. And I'm not seeing that as much on the vertical side. And these long linear projects where we have automated machine guidance, grading, and paving, it's just a little different than the vertical side. So, but we're definitely trying to work together as an industry. And I did want to mention quickly too, George, that I really appreciate JTCES engaging stakeholders like AGC and ACEC and having a voice in the process, because I think that's really helped drive these standards as well.
Me too. I think that's a really good point, and that the committee's done a very good job on that. Alexa, we've only got a couple of minutes before we can get to questions. You want to address the last question and see if we can get through that and get to some of our audience questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So, Chas, you are really involved at the national level through the BIM Council and other efforts. So I'm going to give you the last word here. What can we learn from other industries in regard to these model development standards? And what are the benefits that we can realize from learning from others?
Gosh, so I mean, I am involved in some of the working groups for the National BIM Standard version 4. And I really see those standards maturing. Having zoomed back out, it's really clear that the acceleration of BIM adoption started to happen once those standards were in place. There was just a glut of sort of first generation standards coming out, the AIA contract language that established the foundational level of development definitions, first within software adoption of IFC, and then the Penn State project execution planning guides. Those all came out in the late 2000s, and from there BIM just exploded. And so I really think that standards are key. And there's a question in the chat about, like, can we use AI? How's that going to help solve our data problems? And I truly don't believe that the solution lies in complex technology that most people don't understand. That just creates more problems. AI takes us almost back to the pre-Reformation, right? It's something that none of us know, and we're putting our trust in this technology. And if you really want to learn more about AI, you should look up Dr. Missy Cummings's research, because she's researched a lot on human in the loop use of AI. And she's an ex-fighter pilot, and so she is focused on military applications, but she also looks at consumer applications like autonomous vehicles and things like that. And she has this hierarchy of decision making, and AI is terrible at top-down decision making, right? It can do the easy bottom-up stuff, but anything that involves judgment, AI can't do, and it won't be able to do probably in our entire careers. And that's what standards really are about, right? It's helping engineers apply judgment. It's providing the clear communication so that we understand the information that we're dealing with, and then we're applying our engineering judgment. And they don't absolve us of our engineering judgment. They just help us get there.
Great, thanks, Jess. Let's move on to some questions that we've got in the chat. One of the ones I think is something that everyone is interested in is sort of this move toward digital as-built. And I think with regard to that, right now, without IFC or something that is the intermediary, we've got a designer model, and then we've got a contractor model. So with regard to model and updates, who's responsible for managing and validating the model? And then secondarily, how does the agency manage the model if they don't have the personnel or resources to own it? So I'm going to start with John. What's your take from an agency perspective?
Well, I mean, currently our process is very PDF based, right? There's initiatives out around asset collection or digital as-built. But when you start getting into model delivery, the contractors currently are responsible for the PDF process. But when we're starting to look at asset collection during construction for some of our assets, and one of the things we're looking at is having our CE&I forces kind of do that data capture. Similarly, I think Alan was alluding to that earlier. Just because that gives us back control over how it's collected and the accuracy and the standardization. So that's kind of where we're kind of headed. We haven't really solved that problem yet. We're still working on those model management SPs, but we still recognize that there's a contractor's model and there's the as-let model. And then there's this consensus model that we potentially build from, but maybe I think we a long time ago decided not to define it as a consensus model because there could be legal issues around that.
Right. Eric, what about from a contractor's perspective? I mean, in the past, you've taken PDFs and marked them up, or maybe used the phrase constructed as designed. What do you see with this as far as managing models, and what if the agency doesn't have the personnel to do that?
Hopefully every document we turn in can have the note of constructed as designed, right? But one thing that I think is really difficult is when it comes to as-built is you're trying to capture and sense the world around you and digitally store it in a way that's useful in the future. And contractors have become very good at capturing geometry. But one area where we really struggle is data attribution. And so if a client is interested in some sort of management capability or some sort of further use of that data beyond just grabbing an elevation at a spot on a surface, or maybe a single GPS as-built point of where a utility was installed, I think it gets really tricky for contractors because we don't always understand and know what the intended use of that attribute or what that asset is. And so beyond the kind of the traditional tension of, hey, yeah, we built it as, constructed as designed. We also have the ability and kind of the potential in the future to say, yeah, we constructed it as it was designed, but maybe we didn't understand what the documentation or the value of that documentation was going to be, right? So I think that there needs to be some additional clarification around those expectations. But I look forward to being able to turn in data digitally, right? It's much easier for us to be able to have a process in place to go out and capture data digitally rather than marking up a PDF plan set. And I have had projects in the past where I've tried to probably be a little bit too progressive, but we tried to turn in a whole land XML file of all of our digital as-built data. And the client rejected it and said that we had to go in and redline PDFs. So I desperately want to see that future. I do think that there is some more standards and some more communication that needs to happen around that subject. But I think it'll be extremely beneficial for clients and kind of all of the end users of infrastructure as well.
Thanks, Eric and John. And Will, I'm going to guess that from a ACEC consultant perspective, you've got some concerns with this. You want to share those with us?
Sure, George. No, this is great discussions with digital as-builts and kind of what I see, George, it ties a lot into what we're talking about. And I agree with John and Eric on this. But, what I see is open data standards are the key for all this, to really, I know when I first came on board with JTCES, the goal was to always leverage that data throughout the project lifecycle. And, too often today, we do a great design model that's tossed, the contractor has a great model that's not carried ahead, and then we start over again at asset management. So I really think laying out the standards, and you may collect information for your digital as-built all the way back at the design side and see the contractor adding more information to that as well. But I think one of the keys on this is we've got to be on open data standards and have just a data model that we all can add to as we progress the project along.
Right. Thanks, Will. Thanks all of you. Alexa, I think we've probably got time for one more question.
All right. We got a lot of questions. There was a question on benefits that I'd like to to answer because this comes up all the time. Question was, were the BIM benefits to the public quantified? Like, would it say X millions of dollars or whatever? So I just finished a study for Federal Highways in collaboration with NCHRP about BIM benefits and return on investment. And what we found is that the benefits are significant, mainly because the costs associated with implementation of BIM are costs that a lot of times you're going to incur anyways. So such as updating your software platform. I don't think there's a choice for anybody to stay on design software that is 10 years old anymore. Everybody has to jump onto the new version of the software because the old software is no longer supported or is being sunset, right? So that's one of the biggest costs related to BIM. But the benefits are so many, and it can apply to any type of project, not just the big projects. But all the way from improved quality to improved change order avoidance. And that's the biggest item that we were able to quantify. And so the return, the ROI that we were looking at in the study was like, an average of a factor of 3. And that is just with 6 benefits that we were able to quantify. So how much you save, it depends on where you are in your maturity and how well you've kept up with the technology and how big your program is and how you're using your information beyond construction. Because the benefit for smaller projects really happen beyond construction, and being able to utilize the information that you get from a digital as-built, maybe not necessarily a 3D model, but even 2D type models like striping are important to keep in a database for an agency to manage striping plans every year, to know where you need to go stripe. Or, a lot of times when I was at the DOT, that we had districts that striped an area and ended at the border of their district when another district was doing that in a week. And if they would have let that in combination, they would have saved a lot of money, but nobody knew what anybody else was doing because there wasn't access to an enterprise database. Everybody kept their information in Excel sheets and things like that. So a lot of the benefits really are related to accessibility to information that is meaningful to make decisions, to maintain and manage your system, and also in construction to avoid change orders that when you start early on collaborating with all the stakeholders, you can avoid a lot of common change orders that we see in the field today.
Great, thanks, Alexa. So we're done with our panel discussion and the webinar, and Ian Howell is going to wrap this up for us. Ian?
George, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you great.
So this is the third in a series of BIM for infrastructure webinars. Previously, we've talked about model as the legal document and also moving your agency to digital delivery. There are links to recordings of both those first and second webinars on the heap.org site if you happen to miss them. On the next slide, we are also planning future webinars approximately quarterly. As you can see here, we've got a number of different topics which we've touched on today, but we want to delve into in more detail. Revisiting model as the legal document is obviously a really powerful and mission critical concept. Going through more information on the pooled funds, the work being done by JTCWS, touching again on digital as-built and working all the way through to digital twins. And if you've registered for this webinar, we'll obviously keep you posted on those upcoming events. If you have a topic that's not in this list, please let us know, because we would love to be sure that we're providing the information that's most helpful to you. On the next slide, I wanted just to thank HEAP for co-sponsoring and collaborating in pulling all of this together. HEAP's mission is about peer exchange of knowledge, experience, and best practices. And Elaine and George did remind us all that there's the upcoming iHEAP conference on November 30th through December 2nd in Hartford, Connecticut, which would be a great chance to network with industry peers who are responsible for digital transformation. On the next slide, I'm the US representative for Building Smart International, as Roger alluded to. It is an international standards organization. We work closely with users to define requirements and processes and information exchange specifications. We work with industry experts with a pretty rigorous process to come up with the development of standards. We work with vendors to get those standards implemented, and that's really the phase of work we're at now with the infrastructure schema, that vendors are starting to implement that. And I know that you're all waiting on that IFC support in those commercial products to achieve some of the things we've talked about today. And that work does get submitted to ISO. Our third sponsor, on the next slide, please, is the TRB subcommittee, BIM for infrastructure. I draw your attention in the middle of the slide to the focus groups. If any of these specific topics are of interest, I would encourage you to contact either Lance or Charles to participate and get involved and dive a little deeper on all of the work that is being done. And then finally, I wanted to share with you a number of different contacts. Any one of us can be a point person to get you to the right people. As we want to obviously have any follow-up questions, please ask them, and we'll do our very best to let everyone know the answers. A recording of today's webinar will also be available and published on the heap.org site. And we will send you an email letting you know when that recording is available. So thank you everyone for your attendance. I hope you found the information useful, and we look forward to you participating in our future webinars.